Welcome back, everyone. I'm Carrington-Russell, Australian award-winning author of contemporary romance and kick-butt heroines in action-packed fantasy worlds. And I have a very special guest for you today. We are talking USA Today best-selling, known for her smart, steamy contemporary romance with a happily ever after, known for books such as The Worst Guy and Inner Jam. We are talking to the one and only Kate Canterbary. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, better now that you're on. I'm super excited for this interview. So, yeah, take me back to the start. What got you
Yeah.
into writing and how did you find publishing?
So I think I've been writing a little bit of something forever. Since I was young enough to think of the idea of sitting down and writing stuff on my own. And definitely wrote some very low quality fan fiction when I was 12, 13, 14, and enjoyed it very, very much. But then got away from it for a while. And it wasn't until I had my daughter, and she's going to be 11 pretty soon, that I had time for the first time in a while to sort of sit. And it wasn't necessarily chosen, but like I had this time where I had a small child who required that I be there and feed them and rock them and give them all this attention. And I read a ton of books on my phone because that was all I could juggle at the time. And I had this moment where I was able to think back to stories again. I was able to like let stories run wild in my head. And it really took hold. And part of it was, I had a very fussy baby about 11 years ago who required a ton of walking the halls in the middle of the night. And there's nothing to keep you awake other than just letting your mind wander. And from there I created a bunch of characters who wouldn't stop talking to me. And I started writing mostly as a little bit of self-preservation at the time, because having a newborn is insane. I mean, it absolutely takes away all semblance of normality in life. And it was writing was this fun outlet where I could just sit down and do something and not be holding a baby for a little while. And it was really wonderful. And at the time, publishing was having a bit of a renaissance where there was indie publishing for seemingly the first time, or the barriers to which had dropped so much. And I just thought, well, might as well give it a try and see where this all goes. And like part of it was that like I had these characters who I knew they had so many stories to tell, and so might as well get one out now so I can tell the other 5 or 10 when I'm ready for it.
Did you ever attempt to go down the traditional route, or did you always know that indie is what I want to do? And what year did that first book come out on?
Mhm.
What book was it too?
So the first book was Underneath It All, which is the first book in the Walsh series, and that was 2014. And so, it took about 2-ish years to write that first book. Um, and that was quite the journey. But as far as traditional goes, when I was a teenager, when I was 14 and writing my fanfic, I definitely sent some manuscripts off completely unsolicited. Immediately got them back with a note saying, "We did not ask for this. Thank you, no." In all of my teenage bravado, of course. But since then, like I like being in control of so much of the process. Like I like being able to make decisions and make changes as I see fit. And that is something that I think is uniquely suited to indie publishing. And also, my background before writing was in corporate consulting type stuff. And so for me, I find the pace of traditional publishing where it takes you a very long time to get from one point to another and everything goes through a very slow meat grinder. It like scratches at my brain,
Yeah.
where like I am, and I don't know if this is like how I was bred as a consultant or like going to business school. I don't know what it is, but I struggle with the deliberativeness of the process. And so I like to be able to make a decision and implement it, and it's done. And I think that definitely suits me as far as indie goes.
When did you start noticing a momentum that it wasn't just one book and it wasn't just one reader? There was a lot of readers, there was income coming in, and you were like,
Mhm.
wow, I'm actually an author. When was that moment for you?
Yeah, so I had three books out, and it was early 2015. I want to say like maybe May or June. And I think it was that I had had a BookBub featured deal on the first book. And I went from having a very small, dedicated, loyal, wonderful um, cadre of readers to very rapidly having a stadium of readers that I did not know what to do with at all. Um, and so it was very quick and very fascinating in that regard. And I've learned so much about how to embrace the fandom. I did not do it well when I was just starting out. I had so many, like I very much was in the mindset that I could tell readers what to think about a book, which is absolutely wrong. Like I've birthed this book, it's out, it's yours. I have nothing else to do with it. But back then, I would see like readers would come to me and say, "Oh, I love this character, but I hated this one," and I would struggle with that so profoundly. Be like, "What? No, you're wrong." And let me explain to you why. So, yes, that was ages ago.
Did you ever struggle with having that quick growth? Were there any sort of imposter syndromes or anxieties, or what were some of the conversations you had to have with yourself to better manage and deal with having a larger readership and following?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. A few things. So first was learning like the author space and the reader space, and it is so interesting right now, now, but also in the past few years with social media and its proximity between authors and readers, so that you can be in touch with an author, you can be face to face with them and tell them all of your thoughts, ask all of your questions immediately. Whereas, you know, decades ago, you would write a letter and send it off, and maybe somebody would answer it, but probably not. And I think that defining for myself, like, this is my space. These are the things that I acknowledge and engage with. And what, like, I don't look at reviews ever. Um, and regard like great ones, negative ones, they're not for me, they are for readers. I try to limit like my social media intake so that particularly around releases, because it is so easy to get a little like you get high off of the enthusiasm of a release, and there's so much buzz and joy, and it's easy to feed on that and let that sort of elevate you, and it makes it difficult to then sit down and start from scratch with the next book.
And I think too, it is, and we have this discussion often on here, you get quite frazzled when it comes to social media as well, because there's so many places to be. And I think a massive learning lesson for a lot of writers and authors is focusing on the writing, because there are so many other things that we can be doing. And social media is such a big one because there's also so many platforms. So a lot of people try and do all of the things.
Yeah.
What are some of the tips or advice you would have for authors who are trying to do that? Did you narrow down on particular platforms yourself, or do you delegate? What do you do?
So I am not historically great at delegating. So I will admit that and put it out there. For the most part, I there are very few things that I delegate, and it's something that I would love to get better at. I spent some time doing a few tasks this week that I was like, this is not the greatest use of my time. But also finding the right people to work with can be super challenging. But aside from that, for social media, it took me a long time to realize that you do not have to be everywhere, that I do not have to be everywhere. I don't have to be in every single conversation. I used to think that if I didn't, share a friend's cover release post, or if I wasn't there on someone's release day, then like that was somehow wrong or inadequate. And I've come to realize that like I cannot be all things to all people, and that's okay. And there's also not a scorecard. But aside from that, the thing that I wish I had known sooner is just find the social media platform that speaks to you, that is your comfort zone, because that is better than churning things out on other sites that is not comfortable.
I really want to talk about your new release. So, In a Jam came out September 2022. Yeah. I was like,
Yep.
2022 sounds weird all of a sudden, I think, because my mind's so forecasting into 2023 at the moment.
Yep.
But yeah, tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind that book and yeah, what it's about.
Yeah, so this is a jilted bride who ends up back in her old small hometown, and she has to get married because there's a will that requires her to do that in order to inherit the family farm. And her best friend from high school, who she did not ever know very much loved her, um, is still there, much to her surprise, and he is raising his sister's child now. And so they have come back together after 10, 15 years apart, and they end up married as a marriage of convenience. But that shifts rather rapidly when they realize that there might be more to it than just getting the land. Um, and so this character, Noah, the male main character, he appears very tangentially as a not even a side character, but a tertiary character who is mentioned in passing in some of the Walsh series books as the jam man, the guy at the farmer's market who sells jam, who burly guy rolls up his sleeves a lot. And there had been calls for a jam man book from readers for at least, I want to say 6 or 7 years now. And I'd always said like, yeah, I'll get there eventually. Um, and for whatever reason, that was just the book that I wanted to tackle this year. And it took me a long time to get to know the characters and to get to put faces in people behind them, because he really was just the whisper of a character. So I didn't have a lot to go on before. And so it's my longest book by a lot. And I think it's one that wanders a line between being truly romantic comedy, but also having a lot of like deep emotions and feelings there.
That would have been fun to change your palette a little bit or explore a bit more as well. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
So it's a little bit of both. I have a plan for where I'm going, and as I've gotten longer into this career, I do more plotting out of the moments. So I know each moment that I'm going into, and usually somewhere along the way, I stop and plan out the chapters, but not until I have probably 20, 30,000 words down. So I meet the characters first, I figure it out, and then I can't go any further until I have a plan. And even then, I move things around and make adjustments.
Well, then what does your 9 till 5 look like when do you write at this time? Do you do only admin and marketing at this time? What does it look like for you?
It is very much a smorgasbord. There is not a ton of structure. And I think that, so for me, like the mental calculus that goes into like, when will I write today is part of it is seasonal, part of it is based on when my kid has school events and after school activities, and part of it is very much my mood. So like I go out for a walk or a jog for an hour every day.
Yeah.
But I live in New England, and that means that right now in November or December, it is dark at 4:30 in the afternoon. And so the daylight time gets condensed so aggressively. Whereas in the summertime, it's bright until 8:30 at night. And so I will like that hour of outside walking time can be anywhere from 5 a.m. to 8:30. Winter, it narrows down. So like I juggle things around. When my kid is in school, like I write whenever she's out the door. When she's home, then I relearn the entire process, and I figure out how to do it when she's either asleep or when she's swimming in the pool with her friends, or so it's always a variety. And I have tried so many times to do like, oh, in the mornings I'll do admin, or on these days I will. And that is somehow not my brain. That is, I have attempted it so many times and never succeeded.
And that's the thing, you just have to trust your process, I think,
Mhm.
after a while. Because trust me, there are a million authors where I'm like, their process looks bulletproof. I want that for myself. And
Mhm.
then I'll do it for 2 days and go, this does not work for me at all.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that trying to force yourself or even guilt yourself into a new process is very counterintuitive and it rarely works. I think we always see someone new doing something new. Oh, give me your thing. Tell me your wisdom. And it never quite shakes out the same way for us.
One thing that I hear often on here, and is what I'm hearing from yourself as well, is really trusting ourselves when we're writing and publishing and trusting our process, because I think so often we try to do all the things for one. TikTok work for this author, Instagram work for
Mhm.
this author, Facebook ads work for that author. So you try and do all the things, but it's really difficult, I think, for you to have trust in your own process and what feels right to you, because everyone thinks that there's a cookie cutter. Um,
Mhm.
this is what's going to work. And that's not always the case. It's when you find what works for you. What would be your advice when it comes to writing romantic comedy?
Yeah, I think that for writing romantic comedy, for me, it has to be really organic. So I never start out with the idea of like I'm going to make this funny.
Yeah.
I the moments just sort of present themselves to me. And I'll be thinking about the characters and I'll think, wouldn't it be hilarious? Or like, wouldn't this be just a great moment, like a juicy, wonderful moment if she is scrubbing her bathtub after getting out of the bathtub and she's naked because she just got out of the bathtub and he barges in while she is like bent over the tub scrubbing. Like, and to me, I'm like, the idea is not for it to be funny. It's just, wouldn't this be a beautiful, tense, horrible, wonderful moment between them? And like, if it turns out to be funny, like beautiful. Um, and there have been so many times when I've attempted to write humor in and it falls and no one grabs it. And other times when I write just characters interacting and letting them be who they are, and people are like, this is astounding. I love it. And so I cannot do it in a way that is scripted. It has to just come from these characters telling me, wouldn't it be great if this terrible thing happened?
Have you ever taken courses, or were there particular resources or podcasts or anything like that that you found really helped or even shaped some of your writing technique or even marketing?
So there's like a variety of things. So I've enjoyed Sarah Cannon's Heart Breathings course, which is a bit of planning, but also vision setting and accepting your process. I think like that a lot of my acceptance of my process from my smorgasbord to my writing comes from Sarah Cannon's course. Another piece is Becca Syme's Write Better Faster Academy, which again like helped me understand what my strengths are and why I work this way and accepting it and embracing it. I also like the Spa Girls podcast. That's always a fun one. I I like to just sort of check in and see what other folks are doing, and so I do that through a lot of things like the Romance Author Mastermind conference. Alessandra Torre's conference is always great. You can just watch some videos that feel good to you. I used to do a lot of Romance Writers of America conference stuff, though there isn't as much these days. Um, yeah, and I also just try to remind myself that I cannot consume all of the content and all of it isn't relevant to me because one of my strengths is definitely wanting to learn more about things. And there is a limit to which you are no longer getting returns from all of your learning. Like at some point, you have to stop learning and do. And I
Yeah.
think that is that's something I negotiate with myself pretty frequently because I'm always like, oh, that class looks great. I
Yeah.
love that. I don't need that right now.
Like, I need to write right now.
Yes, exactly. Like, and it sometimes it becomes a good deterrent from writing. Like this is a good excuse to not write, and it functions as procrastination. Like, oh, I need this, but ultimately I need to sit down and do the difficult work of writing.
I find, and maybe this is me projecting, especially at the start of your career, you're so excited and ecstatic for writing, and you absolutely love it, and you're cramming it every second that you can. And then as you progress through the years, because as you said, you've been doing this since 2014, so we are almost at 9 years now. Wow, that's crazy because I published for 2014 too, and I'm definitely projecting now. Like, wow. And then when you get to this point in your career and you're trusting your process, you sometimes procrastinate because writing sometimes isn't as fun as what you felt like it was, or you're just not in the moment. It starts to feel like work at times. Have you ever felt like this? And what are some of the things that you do for yourself to still bring that excitement into it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that when oftentimes when we write our first books, it is at that point we are hobbyists.
Yeah.
And so it's a passion project, and there is very little pressure or requirement attached to it. And that's what makes it so wonderful and beautiful. And that's why so many of the first books, regardless of their quality, if we'd call them our best books or not, they are often loaded up with those things that are just so delicious and wonderful about books that you can't help but love them, because it is that the stuff that we love about books is what comes out. Um, and so for me, I it being work is definitely absolutely true. And one of the things that I've learned, particularly through Becca Syme's courses, has been, my brain will drive around in circles for as long as I let it. And it will procrastinate and it will think on projects for years if I give it the chance. And ultimately, I have to say, we're doing this now. And what I always find is that I will invent so many reasons to not write. And ultimately, when I do sit down and I write and I get into it, I always remind myself, I always realize, oh, I like this.
Yeah.
This is fun. But it's not until I'm in it and I'm doing it. And there have been so many times where I text a friend and say, oh, I don't hate this book anymore. Because I sat down and wrote, like I took myself to a coffee shop where I just closed social media and sat down and did it. And I think part of it is, I know the handful of things that I always enjoy writing. Like I always enjoy when characters are talking. And so if I can invent a reason for them to talk to each other and argue about something silly, that will sort of fill up my well, and it'll give me so much to enjoy. Or if I can write them like texting each other or sending emails, that just something about it turns my brain on and it makes everything flow. And so those are moments that when I am stuck and I'm bored and I don't want to do it, I say, okay, well, let's make them talk about something, anything. And then I remember that I actually do like this a lot.
That sounds very familiar. I love that. You are a USA Today bestselling author, which is amazing. So I would love to know about the moment you found out that you were on the list, and most importantly, how you celebrated.
So I found out on Halloween. Um, yep. And the list didn't drop until I want to say like 4:30 or 5 o'clock my time that day, at which point I was getting my child ready to go out for trick-or-treating. And she was a princess that year. And so she had to have a princess updo hair situation, um, and to have a little tiara pinned into it. And so she had no interest whatsoever in USA Today, because she was like, I want to say 6, maybe 5 or 6. And she had things to do and places to go. And my husband was like, this is great. I've got to take the kid out trick or treating. You have to stay home and give out candy. And so I basically sat on my front porch, drank a beer, and handed out candy. And it was like, that may seem very anticlimactic. However, it was lovely. And, we had always had this tradition of going out to dinner and celebrating new book releases.
Yeah.
And that kind of stopped during COVID. And the idea of just like sitting someplace and having a beer, like that's adequate. Like that's fine mom life successes right there.
I feel like a lot of the time we don't celebrate enough. And so we've moved on to the next thing already. So
Hmm.
actually being able to sit on that front porch with the beer in hand, most important
Yeah.
part, and really just take in that moment, have those couple of hours and, and then seeing kids being happy and giving them candy, like all of that. I feel like that would have been a really cool moment. I'm surprised you
Yeah.
didn't have a six pack. Are you sure you stopped at one beer or?
I did. My tolerance is not what it used to be.
This is an interesting one.
Hmm.
Translations. It's a tricky beast. It's a foreign beast for a lot of people as well.
Hmm.
One, it's very expensive to do. Two,
Yeah.
it's a little bit scary as well because for the most part, yours are in five different languages at the moment. So, how did you manage translating, and what advice do you have for authors who are looking at it for the new year?
Yeah. So it is very tricky. I sold rights to a few books years ago, that rights that I sold in like 2015 are still being released now because like the process is so slow. Um, and so I am of many minds on translation. I think it's a good opportunity to keep your intellectual property working for you. It is very expensive, and the learning curve on finding the right people to work with and then marketing that book effectively is pretty high. And I don't think that I've mastered that yet. Um, I like one of the places that I am looking to delegate in the new year is hiring someone to work on marketing for translations, because there's nothing worse than spending thousands of dollars translating a book or a series only for it to just not do anything,
Mm.
for it to not even earn back your investment. So I think that one of the mistakes that I made, which is so obvious, is that I didn't start with my very best selling books. Like I thought, why don't I translate some novellas? Because that's a low word count, it's a small risk. Let's try that. And that ultimately like just was not a smart move. Those they've done fine, but no way impressive. And I should have started with books that were just my top of the list constant bestsellers, and put those into translation first, even if I went out of order in a series. And I think that like that sounds like something a heretic would say, but I honestly think that it's a better use of money to put your best players in the game than to just put everybody in the game. And I think that a lot of the energy around translation goes toward German, which has simply not been a strong market for me at all. And I think that it not all books do great in German. And I think it's really important to go into the Amazon store for that country and look up your comp authors and see how they're doing. Because if you have 10 comp authors who range from, you know, New York Times bestsellers or number one in the Kindle store, to people who do well and are constantly putting out new books, and are strong authors. If you have that range and you are looking at, are these people selling in that market? That's a good indication, because romantic comedy, for example, is hard to translate effectively. So much of what we write is based on linguistic stuff, on puns, on, you know, that type of humor that can just fall very flat when it comes to translating it. And if you don't have a translator who like really, really gets that and gets the vibe, it can be very tricky. And so looking for good talent for translation, and also like whether your comp authors are doing well in that market. Because otherwise it's too easy to spend $20,000 on translation and not make it back.
Did you outsource all of yours personally, or do you have numerous contracts or?
So I reached out directly to translators, particularly translators who work with a proofreader editor, so that I would be working with a team, because I had some previous challenges where I hired a translator, then I hired a proofreader, and the proofreader every single time would come back and say, "Oh no, your translation is just terrible." And I have no way of really checking that, short of, getting a whole bunch of beta readers handy. And at the time, I didn't have the resources to put that all together. But I kept getting into these situations where the proofreaders or editors would just say, "Oh, I have to redo the whole translation for you, so it's going to cost more." And that song got really old, and it felt you're in this position where you don't speak the language, you can't figure out if they're being honest or not. And there are some translators who will just put the whole manuscript through Google Translate and tell you that they did it word for word. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to find really reputable people, which is where I would go into the Amazon store for that country, look up other books that were either comp or in romance. And if I saw a translator name listed next to the author name, I would reach out to the author and say, "Can you tell me about your relationship with this translator? How was it?" And oftentimes they would say really great things. So like that was beneficial. But the process is tricky. And so I had a lot of project management on my hands with German, French, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. And I did a chunk of them, and I'm going to take some time off from doing it because it's a very demanding process and requires a lot of project management.
Well, then speaking on the flip side, project management again, audiobooks, because
Yeah.
you've got it all going on, you've got everything happening. So, how did you find the audiobook process? And again,
Mm-hmm.
what advice do you have to offer?
Yeah. So my first audios were, I sold the rights to those way back when my first books were released. And I got super lucky with fantastic narrators. I had Christian Fox and Lucy Rivers narrating my first three books. And I knew nothing of audio at the time. So I just thought, like, okay, this sounds good. And lo and behold, they are some of the very best narrators in the business. And that audio publisher had no interest in buying the rest of the books in the series. And so I had all of these readers who had listened to the first three books, wanted the next books. And I had to figure something out. And so I did not go into indie publishing audio like by choice. It was sort of foisted upon me. And so in that regard, it really is a matter of finding producers who understand your vision, know what you want, and will make that happen. And I've worked with some really great producers. I've been very fortunate to have some amazing voice actors. And I think that audio is a much smaller project management lift than translation. I think if you have a book out and you're just adding audio to it, it's like one more thing, and the release is not nearly as laborious as translation.
And I have had a couple of authors say that it's taken a little while to earn what they invested, what they put into it, into audiobooks. It's taken a couple of months to get there,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel like has been across the board. Would you say you had the same experience?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the longer the book and the higher quality the voice actors, the more expensive it is. But ultimately, the audio lives and dies by the narrator. That it doesn't matter how good the book is without exceptional audio talent. It doesn't matter. That is, and I've learned that lesson many times over. It I erroneously believed for a while that people loved a series and therefore they'll just love whatever audio comes out. And I did not fully understand that audio listeners follow narrators more than anything else, which is, it doesn't harm my ego in any way. It's just a good lesson to learn.
Yeah.
And it's nice to know that there are so many great talents out there. There's some big favorites, but there are always new talents coming out.
What would you say your top three must-dos are every time you have a release coming out? What are your three marketing techniques that you do every single release?
So I used to think that I had to do a lot more than you really need to. And I think that it's actually a very pared down thing of like what you actually have to do. And the first one is you have to tell readers in your newsletter. Like newsletter is the way to go. Like they want information from you. And so being clear leading up to the release and then on release day and then a few days after release, like those communications sell books
Yeah.
every time. So something that I've come around to as like a really smart tool has been the bonus epilogue or the deleted chapter. Click a link in the back and you can get more content from me. And getting subscribers that way, those are some of the most engaged subscribers. And it just prolongs the excitement over the book. It just makes people more and more excited if you put a deleted scene of like, oh, this is from the other person's point of view, or what happens 3 years later. It just, and I think that those are the scenes that write reviews.
Yeah.
So if people leave your book with like a happy epilogue moment and then they get some more and it's a warm gooey thing they love, that's what writes your review.
Yeah.
And so that I think has been beneficial in a big way. And I had not prioritized that previously, or I just hadn't put good enough content. I put like, oh, here's a deleted scene, not something that's super gooey or ooey and like warm and wonderful, but
Yeah.
just a deleted scene. And I think that the next one has to be like social media that's authentic to you. And I think that for me, I've been able to migrate a bit over to TikTok and working that out with new releases and finding readers there, but also meeting the new readership that is on TikTok. And that is not like a lot of people don't love TikTok for many valid reasons. But the truth is, there are new readers there who are not on other platforms or they don't prefer other platforms. And if we would like to have long careers, that hinges on constantly replenishing our readership. And that means that from time to time, we have to look at a younger, typically population, which is what you'll find on TikTok.
I find it's very much about adaptability as well because, yeah, and you, I imagine, would agree with this since 2014 to now. It has changed so much,
Yeah.
which is exciting. Definitely
Yeah.
keeps us on our toes
Mm-hmm.
to adapt to, but yeah, it just keeps changing. What would you then say the most surprising thing is that you found within your author career so far within the industry?
So I think that I anticipated, whether correctly or not, that the industry would be more stable, for lack of a better word. Like I expected that, these were the handful of authors who were publishing, these were the blogs or influencers who were out there, these were the publishing houses, and this is how it always went. But I mean, I've watched the fall of the Romance Times convention. I think the last one was 2016, 17-ish. We've seen the shift away from blogs as we knew them to social media based influencers. And I've come to realize that authors, some have a moment in time career and some have a decades long career. And then there's everything in between. And publishing houses will change, trends will change. The covers that were popular in 2014 are not popular today, nor were they popular 5 years ago. And that knowing that nothing stays the same and that the ground is always moving underneath you, it's kind of refreshing to just know that like whatever's happening now won't be happening in a year, and that's okay.
Well, this is one of my most favorite questions to ask. What is the big dream? What is the goal that you are chasing for your author career?
So I like to say that I am something of a tumbleweed blowing in the wind. And I do not know if are tumbleweeds something that are irrelevant in Australia. Like,
I mean, I think I don't know, but I
okay,
know what it is.
okay,
Something like that. Have I seen one? Probably.
it's it's a distinctly American Southwest thing, which is why, like, from time to time, I hear people say, "What do you mean tumbleweed?" Um, but the idea of just sort of going where the wind takes you, very much speaks to me in the regard that um, I don't think too far ahead. I like to think about like the book right ahead of me and then maybe one or two beyond that. And like that is where I put my attention. And I don't know if that's just something unique about the way my brain works, but the idea of looking 5 years ahead is, it almost feels like too much of a trap for me. Like I will put myself in a confined space. And so, because if you had asked me 10 years ago if I imagined that this would be where I am today, the answer would definitely be no. Um, or 15 years ago, I think it would have been laughable. And so the idea that, I'm able to write stories that I enjoy, and I'm able to explore characters who interest me, is the great joy. Like that's the thing that I love to do. And so I don't necessarily see going off into some new direction. If somebody called tomorrow and said they wanted to make a Netflix series of my books, like that might be interesting, but I will let that tumbleweed come to me.
Yep. Just going with the flow, being the tumbleweed. That's going to be the disclaimer on this video, just being a tumbleweed. I have a segment called Speed Dating with an Author. So you and I are going to go on a very romantic date. I lit a candle, I've created ambience. But basically what it is 5 rapid questions. Are you ready?
Yep.
Amazing. What is the clumsiest moment you've ever had?
Yep. So I went to college in Boston, which I write about Boston a lot. And there are a lot of hills in Boston. And in the wintertime, even when there is not snow on the ground, it can be icy just for no apparent reason, just because it's cold. And I have tripped upstairs, downstairs, down hills so many times, that like it's not uncommon for me to think back to various winters in Boston and think like, oh, that was the time I fell off the stairs at the State House, and like that's the time I slid down the hill at Park Street, and I was forever bloodied knees.
Do you know, so I can relate a little bit to this because I lived in Scotland for 2 years in Edinburgh, and I was not used to having that sleet like that in Australia. That is not something that we get too often. It's very hot here. And the amount of times I've either slipped onto my butt, or I remember once being at the corner just as I was about to cross a road, and I've slipped and landed straight on my knees beside a man, and he's just looked down at me, and I was like, oh, my life. So
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
you live with those.
Yeah.
What is the song that best describes you?
That is such a tough one. I feel like there's probably something from like the Wicked soundtrack that aligns beautifully. My daughter is very into Wicked right now, so I feel like I've heard it so many times recently. But yeah, I love that one because there's just so much contrast in there.
What are the 3 words that best describe you?
So I think quirky has got to be in there, and somehow also like linear, which flies in the face of quirky so much. Um, and I think there has to be something about just authenticity, because that's been something that I try to prioritize so much, that if I don't get it to feel like it's actually in this place or true to these people, that I don't sleep well at night.
Who has been your favorite character to write and why? You can only choose one.
So I think my favorite character overall has got to be Riley Walsh, because he's just the kind of character who is such a goofball but is so lovable, and has just all of these moments where you you see something happening to him and you just sort of cringe. And he turns into like one of the best characters that there is, and one of the most lovable guys. And so it was great to write him from the beginning to the very end of the Walsh series and like show him growing up.
What is a unique talent or skill set that you have that not a lot of people know about?
That is such a good one. I feel like so I I am uniquely good at giving difficult feedback,
Mhm.
in having hard conversations with people, like the kind of conversations that like most people avoid. And that comes from my previous career. Although as I think about that now, I imagine that there are some people who are thinking like it wasn't a very good conversation for me. Maybe not.
And put the comments below. No, 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 I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Exactly.
I have had so much fun today. Where do we find you? What's coming out? What do we need to be on the lookout for?
Yep. So I'm on TikTok and Instagram and also Facebook, Kate Canterbury. And so the next few projects that I have, one of them is featuring Dr. O'Rourke from the Vital Signs series. He made an appearance in The Worst Guy. And so I'll be spending some time with him. I'm also working on a series that involves some oystermen. So that'll be fun. But I don't have any timelines for that whatsoever. And I have a few projects that I'm working on committing to and finalizing, and I don't have any dates or timelines. Whenever it comes to be is when it comes to be.
I'm excited. And what was the name of your Facebook group as well, if somebody wanted to join that?
The Canterbury Tales.
I have had so much fun today. Thank you so much for coming on. And who knows, maybe we'll watch this space and get you on again in the new year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, 100%. And I hope everyone has an amazing week and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, guys.